In the dark accounts of criminal history, few names strike the same level of horror as Pedro Lopez, a man infamously known as the Monster of the Andes. His story is not just of brutality and mass murder, but also one of deep societal failure, cultural neglect, and disturbing gaps in justice. While many serial killers throughout history have claimed the life of dozens, Lopez's crimes stand apart in sheer scale. He confessed to murdering more than 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, making him one of the most prolific serial killers the world has ever known. Pedro López was born on October 8, 1948, in Santa Isabel, a small rural town in Colombia. His early years were marked by poverty, violence, and dysfunction. His mother, a sex worker, struggled to raise him along with his siblings. López's father, a violent man, was killed in the Civil War, known as La Violencia, before Pedro was even born. This left him in the care of a mother who often neglected and abused him. Accounts describe a childhood filled with physical punishment and emotional isolation. At the age of 8, Pedro was caught molesting his younger sister. Instead of addressing the issue, his mother violently expelled him from the house. Homeless, vulnerable, and alone, López began wandering the streets of Bogota. It was here that he was exposed to the brutality of street life. He survived by stealing, begging, and sometimes selling stolen items. He was also victimized. Reports suggest he was repeatedly assaulted by the men who took advantage of his desperation. This cycle of abuse, neglect, and violence laid the foundation for the monster he would eventually become. As a teenager, López was taken in by an American family who wanted to help him. For a short while, his life seemed to stabilize. He attended school and received care, but his violent tendencies soon resurfaced. He stole money from the family and attempted to run away, cutting short what could have been a chance at rehabilitation. By his late teens, López was fully entrenched in a criminal lifestyle. In 1969, at the age of 21, he was arrested for stealing cars and sentenced to prison. Behind bars, he experienced further trauma. Other inmates repeatedly assaulted him, an experience that deepened his hatred and twisted worldview. In retaliation, he killed 3 of his attackers, an act that gave him a sense of power and control. This moment marked a turning point. López learned that violence could not only protect him, but also provide dominance. Upon his release in 1978, López unleashed the full extent of his depravity. He began traveling across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, targeting his victims with chilling precision. His preferred targets were young girls between the ages of 8 and 12, children from impoverished families, often abducted from markets, bus stops, or while playing near rural villages. López's process was both terrifyingly simple and tragically effective. He would lure young girls away by offering them small gifts or promising food. In some cases, he pretended to be a kind stranger, gaining their trust before leading them to isolated areas. Once alone, he would assault them and then strangle them to death. What made López especially horrifying was not just the number of victims, but the cold calculation with which he carried out his crimes. He later admitted to killing as many as 3 girls per week during his peak. He spoke of the murders without remorse, describing them as if they were a compulsion he could not resist. In interviews years later, López recounted that he felt pure pleasure during the act of killing. He saw the fear in his victims' eyes as part of the thrill. These confessions paint a chilling portrait of a man completely detached from empathy or human connection. For years, López moved undetected. The transient nature of his crimes, spread across multiple countries, made it difficult for authorities to connect the disappearances. Many of his victims came from poor families and in societies already plagued by poverty, violence, and political unrest. Missing children were often overlooked. It wasn't until 1980 in Ecuador that López's reign of terror came to light. A flash flood uncovered a mass grave containing the bodies of several missing girls. Around the same time, he was caught trying to abduct a young girl from the market in Ambato. Angry locals restrained him until the police arrived. Once in custody, Lopez initially denied responsibility, but when detectives applied pressure, he began to talk. What followed was one of the most shocking confessions in criminal history. Lopez admitted to killing more than 300 girls, around 110 in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and 100 in Peru. To prove his claims, he led authorities to multiple burial sites, where the bodies of victims were recovered exactly as he described. His chilling accuracy confirmed that his confessions were not fabrications, but horrifying truth. In 1983, Lopez was tried in Ecuador. Despite the magnitude of his crimes, the legal system at the time struggled to deal with such a case. He was convicted of the murder of 57 girls, though he admitted to many more, and sentenced to just 16 years in prison, the maximum penalty in Ecuador at the time. During his incarceration, Lopez reportedly displayed no remorse. Instead, he spoke openly about his killings, often describing them with disturbing pride. Prison guards and psychologists who encountered him recalled his chilling calmness and lack of guilt. After serving only 14 years, Lopez was released in 1994 for good behavior. He was then deported back to Colombia, where authorities immediately arrested him in connection to unsolved murders. However, due to insufficient evidence, he was released again in 1998. Following his release, Lopez's movements became murky. In 2002, Colombian authorities issued a warrant for his arrest in connection with the murder of a young girl. However, he disappeared, vanishing into the shadows. To this day, his exact whereabouts remain unknown. The thought that one of history's most prolific child murderers might still be alive and free haunts the families of his victims and raises disturbing questions about the failures of the justice system. Some reports suggest he may have been institutionalized for a short time, diagnosed as insane, and then released. Others fear he returned to his violent ways. Without concrete evidence, his final fate remains an unsettling mystery. Experts who studied Lopez described him as a classic psychopath, charming on the surface but utterly devoid of empathy. His lack of remorse and chilling detachment from his crimes placed him in the same category as the other notorious killers, but on a much larger scale. Unlike some killers motivated by financial gain or revenge, Lopez appeared driven purely by compulsion and pleasure. He once told investigators that his favorite part was the moment of strangulation, the final breath of his victims. Such statements highlight the depth of his depravity and the danger he posed as long as he remained free. The case of Pedro Lopez is not only about an individual's crimes, but also about the failures of the entire systems. Poverty, neglect, and political unrest in Latin America during the 1970s and 1980s created conditions where vulnerable children could disappear without immediate action. Authorities were often overwhelmed, underfunded, or indifferent. Additionally, the leniency of sentencing laws in Ecuador at the time meant that even mass murderers could serve less than 2 decades behind bars. Lopez's release, despite his proven confessions, remains one of the greatest failures of modern justice. Pedro Lopez's crimes left behind a legacy of grief and fear. Hundreds of families were left without closure, many never even recovering the bodies of their daughters. His case continues to be studied by criminologists as an example of how unchecked abuse and systematic neglect can create monsters. For true crime researchers and storytellers, Lopez stands as a grim reminder of how evil can thrive in the shadows of society. His name remains etched in the history as one of the most prolific serial killers, yet his story is also a cautionary tale about the responsibilities of governments and communities to protect their most vulnerable. Pedro Alonso Lopez, the monster of the Andes, is not just a figure of morbid fascination. He represents one of humanity's darkest chapters, where innocence was preyed upon by a man shaped by violence, neglect, and hatred. While his story is horrifying, it also forces us to confront broader issues: the impact of childhood trauma, the dangers of indifference toward the poor, and the urgent need for justice systems that protect the vulnerable at all costs. To this day, the specter of Lopez lingers, whether dead or alive. His crimes remind us of the depth of human cruelty and the haunting truth that justice, in his case, was never fully served. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay cautious. Until next time on ReaperFiles.